Women Against Paternity Fraud is a national nonprofit organization that educates the public, media, and policymakers on issues relating to paternity fraud.
Paternity fraud can occur in many ways. Default judgments, in-hospital paternity acknowledgments, marital presumption of paternity, and lack of legal representation.
Paternity fraud is prevalent and has devastating consequences for men, women, and children.
To prevent paternity and child support fraud, Women Against Paternity Fraud believes that paternity establishment laws and policies must require truthful disclosure. We cannot continue to jail innocent men for the crime of not fathering a child.
In the past, injustices could occur because there was simply no way to be sure about the identity of the child's father. Today, there is DNA testing, so there's no excuse for continued.
Paternity fraud is a worldwide epidemic.
You can't legislate morality, but our laws and policies should always seek the truth.
They want the money from whoever they can get it from.
He would never do anything to hurt anyone ever.
I refuse to continue to pay for somebody else's child.
His ex began talking about some deep, dark secret involving his daughter.
I owe $31,000 and counting.
Not only are they taking somebody's money, but they're involving children. I don't know how it can get any worse than that.
Paternity fraud is a worldwide epidemic.
You can't legislate morality, but our laws and policies should always seek the truth.
They want the money from whoever they can get it from.
He would never do anything to hurt anyone ever.
I refuse to continue to pay for somebody else's child.
Paternity fraud creates devastation within families, and yet it is an issue that is rarely talked about or discussed.
Paternity fraud is a worldwide epidemic. It's not just fraud to the father. It's fraud to the child. It's fraud to the child's family. It's fraud to the taxpayer. It's fraud to the government.
Back in 2000, I found out a very special, dear child I thought was my daughter. I found out after DNA testing that she was not my child, and that in fact, I had been deceived about who her actual biological father was. I went to court expecting that this would be something that would be resolved just based on the truth, because I could prove I hadn't lied, and we could prove that her mom either lied or made a mistake. The court didn't want to hear it. So after appealing it through all of the Court of Appeals, and I took it to the U.S. Supreme Court, proving that there's over 1 million men and boys like me in that situation.
Paternity fraud can occur in many ways. Default judgments, in-hospital paternity acknowledgments, marital presumption of paternity, and lack of legal representation.
My children had talked to me and asked if we could find out where we're from, because we've always been curious. My oldest daughters came back, and I wasn't on hers, and she wasn't on mine. So we decided to pursue further DNA that was state sanctioned through Tennessee. It cost us around $200 to get that done. We got the results back in within 4 or 5 days. The results came back as a 0% of me being the father.
Even if a DNA test proves that a man is not the biological father of a child, he could still be mandated to pay child support for a child he did not father at the expense of his own biological children.
My experience with paternity fraud is being proclaimed to be a father with a default judgment. How it affects my biological children is now they're in a belief that maybe they have another sibling out there. Financially, it affects my children because I'm not capable of keeping up with the bills and certain necessities that my own children need. When it comes down to me working a 40-hour work week, and at the end of the week, I'm being stripped from everything that I worked for.
Not only does paternity fraud affect men, but women can be paternity fraud victims too.
The wife of the guy, the mother of the guy, the fiance, the girlfriend, his sister, his grandmother, his aunt. All of these are people who are often affected because when he can't pay the child support, he goes to jail, and they're often the people who are trying to come up with the money to get him out.
Paternity fraud has impacted me personally, emotionally. It's been, been extremely emotional. My husband is a sweet, sweet man. He would never do anything to hurt anyone ever. To watch him go through this and to see how it's affected him has just been really, really hard. And to see him being taken advantage of has been really, really hard. He's very trusting. He's a very honest person. She swore to him that the baby was his, and he believed her.
This is an issue that impacts men, women, and children throughout the world and leaves its victims in financial, legal, and emotional distress.
This entire experience was emotionally devastating to us. The total for just the attorney is nearly $40,000 and does not include the therapy, which I anticipate will be about $5,000 per year, if not more.
I know that my husband has suffered a lot of depression over it. It's just that idea that I'm not really his dad and at some point he's not going to want me kind of a thing. Not only are they taking somebody's money, but they're involving children. I don't know how it can get any worse than that.
This is not an issue that is only limited to one segment of the population. In all of the years that I worked with states reforming legislation, so many of our opponents tried to say this is an issue that only affects low-income minorities. But there are people who are from all ethnic backgrounds, political, social status, even religious. I've even met 5 pastors who are paternity fraud victims. Our various state bodies have not been willing to measure how many people are affected by it because it would actually point out the need to do more DNA testing.
Falsely accused men who fall behind on their child support payments can have their driver's and business license suspended, their taxes intercepted, and can even be jailed for the crime of not fathering a child.
As of right now, for what I owe $31,000 and counting. License is already being suspended almost to this point. I've been a supervisor in the oil fields and all that, and as soon as they strip your license, they automatically demote you, take away your truck, take away everything that you've worked hard for.
It is often reported that paternity fraud occurs when a mother does not truthfully disclose the identity of the biological father. However, this is not always the case.
Well, I am a victim of paternity fraud myself.
How so?
I was legally separated from my ex-husband and became involved with my daughter's biological father. We had a daughter together, and for 2 years he had a relationship with my daughter, you know, paid child support, we had a relationship, and then after the 2nd year he decided, I'm going to use the presumption of marriage law. He took my ex-husband to court to say he's now the legal father, I'm not, I'm out of the loop. We fought for about 11 years.
She was not going to perpetuate a lie to her child, and because of that, now her child is actually fatherless. According to the state of California, her child has no father because she wouldn't pin the wrong man.
Across the nation, military men are highly vulnerable to paternity fraud. In many cases, this is to take advantage of their income and military benefits.
The military benefits that my husband had definitely were a reason why she chose my husband to be the father. That was told to us by her ex-friend that told my husband. He was in the Marines for 6 or 8 years prior, and then he was in the Army. So he had just gotten out of the Marines, and then he had met her and then joined the Army about a year after that. I do believe that him being in the military did make it very easy for her to commit paternity fraud because he was away, and when she became pregnant, she didn't tell him. He had just gotten home and had been home for a month, and then she told him she was pregnant.
Paternity fraud is an international issue, and Women Against Paternity Fraud has members all across the globe.
Well, I'm from Sydney, Australia. My background, I guess, is that I married a man who had been married before for 20 years and had 2 children to his former wife. About 2.5 years into our family court case, his ex began talking about some deep, dark secret involving his daughter, which would cause her not to want to be with her father anymore and not to want to live with us anymore. But certain things came out of the woodwork. Talk about how his daughter was markedly different from his son. Finally, I said to my husband, do you think that this deep, dark secret might be about biology. At the stage that his daughter had been conceived, he wasn't sleeping with his wife. He was extremely surprised to find that she was pregnant, but he just assumed that the child was his. It never occurred to him that she was sleeping with anybody else. We decided to take a paternity test. The first paternity test came back as 100% negative. That is absolutely no possibility of his daughter being his biological child.
Very few paternity fraud victims find justice in our court systems, but are there really any winners in paternity fraud cases?
It's been almost a year and a half since I last saw her. There's a lot of people that say that with our case, yes, we were a success. We made it through the court case, but there really are no winners in any of this. There's damage done to relationships between myself and the child, between my wife and the child, between my biological child and her as well.
Today, there is DNA testing, so there is no excuse for continued injustice.
Had mandatory testing been available when my husband's eldest was born, a lot of this could have been avoided. The technology exists, and I think the law needs to catch up with the technology.
I was the first person to win this case using that law that says truth does matter. Using DNA to prove paternity matters. Using DNA to disprove paternity matters. And now a young lady is able to find out who her actual biological father is.
Women Against Paternity Fraud is a national nonprofit organization that addresses the issue of paternity fraud through our educational, media, and advocacy programs.
Women Against Paternity Fraud is a great opportunity to learn the process on how do you reform the law, how to become educated, how to become empowered, and then how to take your voice along with other women who say that we're able to tell the truth. When we believe that the other women can also tell the truth and we should require that, then joining with Women Against Paternity Fraud gives you an avenue to become one of many.
After being a paternity fraud victim, I looked high and low with many organizations, and I contacted other organizations. They had my story for years and they did nothing. They go, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear it. Give me more of your court stuff." And they did nothing. Diana actually cared. Every victim, case by case, puts her heart and soul into people and works very hard. And I am very proud to say that I'm a part of Women Against Paternity Fraud.
Don't children deserve to know who their biological father is, their medical history, their heritage, their extended families? Women Against Paternity Fraud advocates for paternity fraud victims against destructive laws and policies that negatively affect families.
You must become educated on how the process works with changing laws. And you should approach your Senate or representatives or assemblymen. You need to approach them with a proven solution. And you must have tenacity. That means you have to be committed to see it through, even if sometimes the committee meetings are not favorable. But you have to also listen to the opposition, because sometimes there's things that you can agree with them on and there's some things that you don't agree with them on. And always press to have public hearings so that all of the people who are affected, the men, the women, the children, all of those people get an opportunity to at least be represented and heard. And that helps bring about reform by inclusion of people rather than excluding select groups.
For more information, please visit our website at womenaagainstpaternityfraud.org or call us at 661-829-6807.
There's a lot of injustice in this world. Paternity fraud is an issue we have the power to change. Why don't we join Women Against Paternity Fraud in advocating for paternity justice?
What do you mean they're taking money out of your check for child support? You don't even have kids. We'll talk about this when I get home.
Let me guess. They have a judgment against your husband?
How does that even happen? What is it all about?
We'll discuss this next on Women Against Paternity Fraud. Default judgments are common and can happen to any man. A woman seeking welfare or child support is required to name who the father and the last known address. She does not have to give a truthful disclosure as to who the real father is. If the man she names as the father has moved or wasn't served, he wouldn't know about the court date to establish paternity. When he doesn't show up to his court date, a default judgment will be filed against him, and he will become an instant father. Even if later he finds out through DNA testing he is not the father, he will still have to pay child support until the child turns 18 or 21 in some states. Because there is such a small window of opportunity to contest paternity, and men often have a lack of legal representation, they often don't prevail in fighting default judgments. When paternity fraud victims fall behind in their child support payments due to job loss, illness, injury, or disability, the child support system has very little sympathy, and they could have their wages garnished. Drivers and business licenses revoked, taxes intercepted, publicly humiliated through most wanted posters, arrested, fined, and even imprisoned. Federal law does not directly require paternity establishments. Instead, the federal government uses the power of the purse to impose conditions upon state eligibility for receipt of federal funds. While nothing in federal law requires or authorizes establishing paternity against the wrong man, there is also nothing in federal law that prohibits or penalizes tagging the wrong man. Eligibility for receipt of federal funds under TANF and under the incentive formula depends only upon tagging the largest possible number of men, and there is no review or requirement that it be the right man. With the enormous sums of federal funds that are at stake, the result is not difficult to predict. The government provides penalties and incentives to the states related to their performance in paternity establishment. Federal law establishes a target of paternity establishment in 90% of cases. But don't children deserve more than child support paid by extortion? Visit our website and become a member. Help us to help paternity fraud victims, because paternity is important to you and to children. Wait, what? This lady cheated on her husband and got pregnant with the other man, and the husband is paying child support.
What? And let me see. That's insane. How can that happen? Did you take a DNA test?
It says on here that the husband did take a DNA test that proved he isn't the father, but since he was married to her, it became what's known as presumption of paternity. And since he didn't contest, he legally became the father.
But that's not fair. How can the mom allow that to happen when she knows the husband isn't the father?
Sometimes the moms can't stop the courts from making a man legally the father. Take Alicia Thompson, for example. She was married but legally separated from her husband. She started dating another man, and then they had a child together. Since she was still legally married, the child was presumed to be her soon-to-be ex-husband's child.
Wait, so sometimes women can be victims of paternity fraud?
Yeah, for years Alicia tried to release her ex-husband from paying child support, even when the DNA test showed her boyfriend was the father. She spent 10 years fighting tirelessly against the presumed paternity laws, all the way up to the appellate court, but was unsuccessful. She only had two choices: keep him as the father or have her daughter legally fatherless. She didn't want her ex to pay, so the state of California made her daughter fatherless.
Wow.
So even when the women truthfully disclose who the real father is and DNA testing backs it up, they still go after the wrong man?
Yeah, because of the marital presumption laws.
How is that even possible?
We'll discuss this next on Women Against Paternity Fraud. Presumptions of paternity is a 500-year-old common law. While many permutations of policy and phrasings exist, the justifications for refusing to grant post-judgment relief form a false paternity establishment, all circle back to a claim that it would be unfair to the child or to the state to release the victim of a false paternity establishment. Many judges don't want to overturn paternity because it isn't in the children's best interest to advocate for paternity establishments. But yet, every week, thousands of cohabiting couples or second marriages break apart. Many of these relationships break up after years of family life, in which one adult served as a step-parent to the biological children of the other adult. The law is unambiguously clear. When these relationships break up, absent unusual circumstances, the step-parents have no financial obligations to the stepchildren, even though many of them will voluntarily continue physical and emotional relationships. The only difference between a paternity fraud victim and a step-parent is that a paternity fraud victim has been subjected to a lie, and precisely because he was subjected to a lie. Some courts will perpetuate his victimization by imposing forward, going financial burdens upon him, which step-parents do not bear. The step-parent enters the relationship with the child knowing that there is no biological connection, and despite that knowledge, affirmatively acts to begin providing support for that child. When the step-parent, male or female, wishes to exit from the financial relationship, there is no question that he or she is absolutely allowed to do so. In contrast, the paternity fraud victim has a financial relationship with the child that is founded upon a falsehood. The paternity fraud victim has not been given the chance to make a voluntary choice to provide support to a child despite actual knowledge that he has no biological relationship. When the fraud is discovered and the paternity fraud victim wishes to cease providing financial support to a child, his case should be stronger than that of a step-parent who entered into the financial support relationship with full knowledge that there is no biological connection. Instead, the paternity fraud victim is never given a choice. Our most elementary understanding of human nature informs us that a man who is free to follow his voluntary will in pursuing a relationship with a child will have a better relationship than a man who is filled with rage and resentment because he continues to be forced to make involuntary payments on the basis of falsehood. If anyone actually cared about the best interests of the child, we would want the truth to be disclosed. In cases like Alicia Thompson, where she voluntarily disclosed who the true father was, the state should back her up in her pursuit to have the biological father emotionally, physically, and financially support his child, instead of using the presumed paternity law in pursuing the wrong man to block a relationship. Visit our website and become a member. Help us to help paternity fraud victims, because paternity is important to you and to children.